Do you guys know that lambs are only born, they're not like people, they're only born in the springtime. They could start as early as February, but February, March, April, that's called the beginning part of Nisan, right, in the Hebrew calendar. And you guys know that shepherds, their job was to wait and to watch, so nothing would go wrong, to watch the birth of the lamb. This is awesome. Okay, Bethlehem was a place that was, if you look in some of the rabbinical writings, a place that they had for the sacrificial lambs. Bethlehem, I meant the house, Bethlehem, which means the house of bread. Now, what are the odds? A place where sacrificial lambs are born, Bethlehem, that's where God chose to have his son delivered in the smallest city of 10,000, in a place where it was known that sacrificial lambs would be born. Come on, stay with me. Okay, Exodus 12:3 says to take a lamb to your father, right? A sacrificial lamb. Okay, it had to be a year old during this time of Passover. But you know, if it's a year old, it means it had to have been born previously in the spring. Okay, so if you understand Jewish holidays, or the lamb, they would die at the same time that they'd be born. And so if you think about the first of Nisan or Nisan, it means the beginnings. And we're getting to something about Jesus. And what do you know? Nisan 1 is the first day of everything. It begins everything. Okay, so the Hebrew calendar is based on the moon. Moon, we get the word month from the word moon. So Jesus died at the full moon. Stay with me. So every Hebrew month begins with a new moon, and it reaches its peak at, imagine that, a full moon. So Jesus died on Nisan 14:15. So let's go to the Hebrew Magim, which is the Magi. Now we're going to talk about the stars. This gets good. Okay, if you read Isaiah 60, that actually prophesies gold and frankincense. It actually prophesies this event. And I want you guys to remember, gold, frankincense, and myrrh represents the prophet, the priest, and the king. Those three gifts that were brought to Jesus. If you guys know Matthew 2, that's where we get the prophecy about the star that's come. Jesus has come. This prophecy, Jesus is here. Now we know Magi were priests, and here we're going to get to something very important. We're going to talk about priesthood. There were certain things that people did, and we're going to use dates to let us know that generally the time frame that we know Jesus had to have been born. So we know King Herod died 4 BC, so we know Jesus was born in the same time frame. Remember, King Herod went looking for the 2-year-olds and below, so we know that his death happened during the time of Jesus' birth. In Daniel 2, he also gives the countdown of when the Messiah is coming. There's a lot of information about this. Then we know in Luke 1 that there was a King Herod, and he talked about a priest by the name of Zachariah. He had a wife named Elizabeth. Does that sound familiar? That's the mother of John the Baptist. Now, this book tells us about the priesthood being divided up into courses. Well, Abijah was the course of Zechariah, so we know we can actually look at documentation to find out when his chosen priesthood, when his time was to be in the temple and to preach. And we know also that John the Baptist was 6 months older than Jesus. So this gives us more information. Because in 1 Chronicles 24, we read about the divisions of the priests, which Abijah's mentioned in there. It's their 8th in line. So we know the exact day that Zechariah would have been on duty. So out of 24 weeks altogether, he would have fallen into the 8th week. Okay, so there's the answer in one of the Dead Sea Scrolls writing, and this gets good. There you will find a calendar of the priestly horses. So you need to know this calendar goes for a few years before it actually repeats itself. So we know the priestly calendar begins on the beginning of the equinox. We know that by these findings in the Dead Sea Scroll. So we're getting closer to something. The Dead Sea Scroll also gives you one of these dates, the date that we're talking about exactly. So the Talmud also confirms this because it says the temple was destroyed on a Sunday in 70 AD. And guess what? Just by that, you get the names of the priests involved. Guess what? The Dead Sea Scroll date and the Talmud match exactly. So here's the question. When was Abijah ministering? If you use either one of those two, and you bring those numbers and those dates back together, it doesn't matter which one you use, then you have a few answers. So we know the Messiah's birth takes place in the month of Nisan, late March, early April, like 6 BC, roughly. And the priestly calendar brings us back to a very specific time and a very specific date, my friends. It leads us to March 20th, 6 BC, and the calendar of the priests lead us to the same dates as the Talmud does, and it's Nisan 1, the day of the beginning of all things. So in the writings of the Vatican, there's a writer called Hippolytus, strange name. He says it's Jesus' birthday is the 25th of December. But then you can see where the writings were censored, and then later he says Messiah was born in the month of Nisan. It's almost like something was altered. So what's the most exact shadow of Jesus Christ? Well, it's God tabernacling among us in the Old Testament, right? The tabernacle. Well, John 1:14 says the Word became flesh and tabernacled among us. The tent references the incarnation.